Gay nutcracker.
Let's see how Earth responds to that.
Welcome to TYT, I'm your host, Anna Kasparian, and while I'll be doing the first segment solo today to give you some updates on the presidential election, later in the second segment of the show, Cenk Uygur will be joining me. I'm gonna be doing these election-related stories solo, considering the fact that Cenk Uygur is running in the Democratic primary, and we don't want to have someone with a conflict of interest weighing in on these topics. And we wanna, of course, protect the integrity and credibility of the show, so that is why he won't be here for the first segment. However, when he comes for the second segment of the show, we're gonna give you some updates on the ongoing war in Gaza. The aerial bombardments have now started up again. The number of civilian deaths continues to rise on the Palestinian side. A lot of updates to get to in regard to that. There is this very clear orchestrated effort to immediately deflect from what is currently transpiring in Gaza with that high civilian death toll by, I guess, pivoting to a discussion about sexual violence perpetrated by Hamas. We'll talk about that in detail. And the asymmetrical coverage that we're seeing right now in corporate media. It wasn't like that in the beginning of the war, but that's certainly the case now. A lot of Democrats, corporate Democrats, are mad at Pramila Jayapal over the way she handled questions in regard to sexual violence committed by Hamas. Later in the second hour, we'll talk about one of the largest wealth transfers in American history, to the tune of $5 billion that's going to be transferred from parents to their children. So yes, it's an estate tax related story, but there's really important tidbits in there for you to know about, so you can kind of understand how wealth is really accumulated in this country and how inheritance plays a huge role when it comes to the accumulation of wealth. So we'll get to all of that later in the show. But if you are a member, you can look forward to an awesome bonus episode today where we will have a debate about whether or not a Folgers commercial dating back to 2009 promotes incest. Yes, that is a topic today. I think that there will be a little bit of a debate about it. So if you are a member, you can check that out. If you're not a member, just go to tyt.com/join. You can become a member that way, or click on that join button if you're watching us on YouTube, and you can join through YouTube and become a member that way as well. All right, without further ado, let's talk about what's happening with the Democratic primary, especially in a state like Florida. The state of Florida has already elected incumbent President Joe Biden as the Democratic Party nominee, even before a single resident in the state of Florida has casted a single ballot. Now, why is this the case? Well, it turns out that the state's Democratic Party has basically decided to make the most undemocratic move by refusing to hold a primary. They have canceled their Democratic primary election. So Biden will literally be the only Democrat on the ballot when the primary election takes place in Florida. So here's how it all went down. It's important to know that every state has its own rules in regard to how candidates make it onto a ballot. Like some states, for instance, will require petitions. Now in the state of Florida, the requirements are actually not that strict at all. In fact, one member of the Florida Democratic Party said the following, let's go to graphic 3 here. There's no requirement for presidential candidates to do anything to get on the ballot. Interesting information for you to know about as I continue to tell you the disgusting moves that were made by Florida's Democratic Party. Here's what they did. So in Florida, the deadline this year for parties to submit a list of approved candidates to state election officials was November 30th, okay? That was the deadline, November 30th. Now here's what happened. According to the Florida Democratic Party communications director, the process to be on the Florida ballot has been publicly available on our website. It clearly states that the Florida Democratic Party's primary ballot is submitted to the Secretary of State by November 30th of 2023. This is the standard process. The state executive committee meets to vote to place candidates on the presidential primary ballot at the Florida Democratic Party's state convention every 4 years. So basically, if you're thinking about running, you're a Democrat, you submit your name as a candidate, and then the state Democratic Party holds some sort of convention in which the members will vote on those candidates and decide on who's going to make it onto that ballot. They have that convention every 4 years. Well, guess what? Here's the update. The 3 candidates were contacted by Florida Democratic Party officials on Wednesday, November 29th, so 1 day prior to that deadline, for the party to send the names of the candidates who would appear on the ballot. And were informed that the party's state executive committee had already met at the state convention on October 29th and submitted the approved candidate list to the Secretary of State on November 1st. So deadline is November 30th, but unbeknownst to anyone, okay, other than the members of the Florida Democratic Party, they had already held their convention on October 29th, and they're like, listen, we've already voted, and Biden got all the votes. Now keep in mind, Dean Phillips didn't even announce that he was running for president until October 27th. So 2 days later, Florida decides to hold this convention. The state Democratic Party in Florida holds this convention, and they do their vote, and oh wow, everyone voted for Biden. So Biden, they're canceling their primary. Biden will be the only Democrat on the ballot during the primary election in Florida, okay? Now, in other words, a month prior to that deadline, the Florida Democratic Party unilaterally made the decision to cancel their state's primary. That is what happened. Now, the fact that the decision was made way before that deadline, that the convention happened way before that deadline, and that candidates weren't even informed until 1 day prior to the deadline, honestly indicates to me that they didn't even want the candidates to have enough time to object or even fight back against what they did here. Okay, so let me just pause for a second. This is unbelievably authoritarian and undemocratic. Canceling the primary election in the state of Florida is a big deal. Florida has 250 delegates, 250. And they have denied the other candidates, that includes Dean Phillips, Marianne Williamson, Cenk Uygur, they have denied them the opportunity to appear on that ballot, and they intentionally withheld information from these candidates in order to prevent them from doing anything about the undemocratic moves that the Florida Democratic Party was engaging in. Okay, so keep in mind again that Dean Phillips launches his campaign on October 27th, and this decision by the Florida State Democratic Party was made 2 days after. According to Florida law, if there is one presidential candidate, neither the name of the candidate nor the names of delegates shall be printed on the ballot, and in this case, the election will be canceled. Now, so the question is, why were the other candidates excluded? Well, the Florida Democratic Party communications director said in a statement on Friday that all 3 candidates did not receive any votes at the October committee meeting. The committee meeting that no one knew about, the committee meeting that they held and didn't let any of the other candidates know about? Yeah, that one. Now, Florida has more than 4.4 million registered Democrats, and those Democrats will not have a chance to voice their opinion or weigh in on the Democratic primary at all, because their state Democratic Party has basically made the decision for them. Now, mind you, this is the same Democratic Party that is running on this notion that if Joe Biden doesn't get elected, democracy's on the line, everyone. Democracy's on the line. What are we gonna do? Donald Trump is a threat to our democratic process. But behind the scenes, you have the Democratic Party ensuring that there is no robust Democratic primary. And mind you, they're doing that at a time when about 70% of Democratic voters are begging for anyone other than Biden, anyone other than Biden. Democratic voters aren't happy with Biden. Democratic voters signed on to the Biden campaign in 2020 because they felt that he was, at that time, the best candidate to beat Donald Trump. And remember, Joe Biden had promised Democratic voters that he was only gonna run for that one term and then he was gonna step aside. Oops, he lied. He absolutely lied about it. And look, if you look at the polling, it is abundantly clear that the other Democratic candidates are still behind considerably, okay? Biden has a giant lead over them, which to me makes it even more egregious and gratuitous that the Florida Democratic Party did what they did here. It's just, what are you guys afraid of? If Biden has this massive lead, why would you need to make this unbelievable, undemocratic maneuver to prevent the other candidates from appearing on the primary ballot? Now, according to Cenk Uygur, the Florida Democratic Party purposefully withheld valuable information from them to ensure that they wouldn't make it on the ballot. So let's hear what he has to say, and a little later we'll hear from Marianne Williamson as well.
All three of us are perfectly aware of the rules in every other state, and we have asked repeatedly the state of Florida through our campaigns what the rules are here so that we could abide by them. They never returned our calls or our emails to any of the campaigns. And then the day before the deadline, they say, oh, by the way, we made this decision. Not only did we make this decision, we made it a month ago, but we never let any of you guys know.
We made it a month ago and we didn't let any of the other candidates know. That is exactly what happened here. And again, it is egregious, it's undemocratic, and it shows that the Democratic Party really has no leg to stand on as they fearmonger about the threat that the Republican Party poses to our democratic process. Because right here we have a clear example of the Democratic Party engaging in something that is incredibly undemocratic. And again, let's take a look at the polling. If you look at the polling, you'll notice that the other candidates aren't, they don't have a lead over Biden. They're not even close. Okay, so Biden's at 77%, Williamson's at 8%, Dean Phillips is at 6%, and Cenk Uygur is at 2%. So why engage in this maneuver knowing that Biden has a lead, knowing that you are risking the negative headlines and the negative coverage that they're getting right now as we speak? It's just, again, yet another example of mainstream Democrats engaging in undemocratic behavior while simultaneously fear-mongering about the undemocratic behavior on the right. Now, this decision also takes away from those 4.4 million registered Democrats in the state of Florida, and that is unfair. I think it's incredibly unfair to Democratic voters. Look, say what you want about the other candidates, right? And I haven't endorsed anyone on the Democratic side, but you should give everyone who wants to run an opportunity to make their case. And in the state of Florida, the Democratic Party is saying, no, we're gonna decide on behalf of those 4.4 million Democratic voters. Now, with that said, the three other Democratic candidates have blasted the Florida Democrats in the state of Florida for doing this. I want to go to the next video where you're gonna hear from Marianne Williamson. By the way, they're planning on filing lawsuits in response to what is transpiring in Florida. Let's watch.
I think that the Florida statute itself is unconstitutional, giving that kind of power to the party. The party itself is a political committee. It's not a government agency, but it's playing a quasi-governmental function here. And it has no right to block democracy this way. It has a responsibility to the public good. And we all know that we're living at a time when our democracy itself is in crisis. We all know that the threats to democracy of them that are represented by people such as Donald Trump. But the irony here, of course, is that the Democratic Party claims to be trying to protect democracy, but their way of doing it is to suppress democracy. It's wrong, and it's also undercutting of the most basic rights. If we cannot assume that the people of the United States have fair and equal access to knowing even who their candidates are, then we don't have fair and equal access to the vote. And this is why this is a transgression of the 14th Amendment. And this is what we will be claiming in court if we have to.
She's absolutely right about that. And I really do hope that they pursue legal action against Florida's Democratic Party for doing what they're doing. Because this goes beyond who your preferred candidate is. This really is about protecting voters' right to voice who they prefer. Even if it's a long shot, even if their preferred candidate has no shot. It is ridiculous for the mainstream Democratic Party to make that decision on the voters' behalf. That is the antithesis of democracy. And finally, as Politico reports, go to graphic 6, Florida Democrats are in violation of the National Party's rules that require delegates to the Democratic National Convention be allocated in a fashion that fairly reflects the expressed presidential preference or uncommitted status of the primary voters, or if there is no binding primary, the convention and or caucus participants. Now, Nikki Fried, who's the chair of the Florida Democratic Party, disregarded concerns about them engaging in undemocratic maneuvering here. In fact, she viciously went after Dean Phillips and argued that he is engaging in conspiratorial thinking. Here's her exact quote. "We are dismayed by Dean Phillips's conspiratorial and inappropriate comments comparing the state of Florida to the Iranian regime as part of his knee-jerk reaction to long-established procedures. This is unbecoming of someone running for higher office." Now look, they might not like some of the hyperbolic language that Dean Phillips engaged in order to talk about the very clear undemocratic moves that the Florida Democratic Party is engaging in. But to try to pivot and deflect by calling the candidate that they're screwing over unbecoming, his behavior is unbecoming. No. Let's be absolutely clear here. I've got no love for Dean Phillips. He's a standard corporate Democrat, to be quite frank with you, but he's not in the wrong here. The Florida Democratic Party is in the wrong here. And while what I'm about to say is pure speculation, I have no evidence of it, I would bet my bottom dollar that the Biden camp is involved in this. That they don't want a robust primary. They don't want any challengers, and they're making it abundantly clear that they're going to squash the possibility of anyone being able to fairly engage in this primary process. And I think that's gross. I think it's incredibly gross. Because here's the thing, if I were Joe Biden, especially if I have that comfortable lead, I would make it known to the American people, right? That I find it abhorrent that the state Democratic Party in Florida is not giving the other candidates a fair shot. I'd be embarrassed, to be honest with you. I'd be embarrassed because I wouldn't want to make it appear as though I'm such an insecure loser that I need my minions in the state of Florida to squash the possibility of other candidates being treated fairly in this process. But he's not really speaking out about that, right? He's not speaking out about it at all. So it tells me something about the Biden camp. It tells me something about the Democratic Party, and it's not just about this election. We've seen them engage in shady behavior in other primaries and previous election cycles. And again, if the only thing Democrats are gonna run on in 2024 is, well, please vote for us because democracy is on the line, they really have no leg to stand on if they're gonna pull crap like this. All right, one more story before we take a break. And this also has to do with Biden, but it more has to do with the Latino vote. I find this story so fascinating, considering that the Black and Latino vote has really been a mainstay in the Democratic base for many, many decades. But things are starting to change, and it's important to understand why.
I think we could see the inflation. There's a lot of people that complain about interest rates.
When the economy is not doing great, when you support small businesses, you help the local communities also. And I haven't seen that with Biden.
Really, neither one of them deserve my vote. I almost feel like I should go some other route. Maybe somebody else will come up.
As we've been sharing with you all for months now, poll after poll shows that the Democratic Party's handling of the economy is leading to waning support among Latino voters. Now, the latest survey was done by Unidos US, and that poll is really no exception. So they didn't really talk about what it is that these voters are unhappy with Biden on. They just wanted to understand, what do Latino voters actually care about? Because there is this, in my opinion, mistake by a lot of Democratic candidates in kind of thinking they know what Latino voters are motivated by, what they're inspired by, what's gonna get them to the polls. But more often than not, what they end up doing is they treat this block of voters as a monolith, And they're not really hearing out what their main concerns are, what kind of policy issues they want addressed. And so let's talk about that in some more detail. Now, it's important to keep in mind that the margin of error for this survey is 1.8 percentage points. Pretty small margin of error considering other polling that we've talked about on the show before. But with that in mind, here's what we found. The poll asked Latinos to pick the three most important issues for Congress to address. Inflation and the rising cost of living were named by 54% of Latinos. Jobs and the economy came in second at 44%, and healthcare was third at 33%. So let's keep it real, ladies and gentlemen. Those are all bread and butter issues. At the same time, what you typically hear from Democratic candidates attempting to appeal to Latino voters is just nonstop emphasis on social issues, which they do care about. But to assume that they care about those issues, like immigration, for instance, far more than they care about their own economic well-being, I think is misguided, to say the least. And it's unfounded based on what we're seeing in the polls. Of those surveyed, by the way, 47% approve of how President Joe Biden has been handling his job, while 44% disapprove. So this polling, to some extent, is a little mixed because previous polling of Latino voters showed a lot more unhappiness, if you will, in regard to how Joe Biden has been handling his job. So in this poll, there are more Latino voters who are happy with how he's handling his job versus those who are unhappy with it. Clarissa Martinez de Castro, who is the vice president of Latino Vote and of the Latino Vote Initiative at Unidos US, says that given the income levels of the majority of the Latino population, pocketbook issues and economic concerns are driving the list of more deeply felt concerns at the moment, and notably that housing, this is important, guys, housing as a standalone issue has reached the top 5. Look, in the area of housing, I haven't seen anything from the Biden administration at all. And that is a big problem. Because when we talk about inflation, sure, you're experiencing inflation at the grocery store, you experience some inflation at the gas pump, and that's really something that Biden doesn't have a lot of control over. You know, gas prices really have more to do with the OPEC plus cartel, the oil producing countries, and the fact that many of them can decide to withhold production of oil, which will then drive down the supply and will increase the price at the pump as a result. But Biden could actually implement some policies that could alleviate the pain that Americans are feeling in regard to housing. For instance, he could push for legislation or maybe even consider an executive order that prevents, declares a national emergency in regard to housing. Once you do that as a president, you actually have a lot more leeway in terms of policy. You can kind of skirt the gridlock that you see in Congress all the time. And you can push for bans on foreigners in investing in residential real estate here in the United States as an investment vehicle when they have no interest in actually living here. You can also ban private equity firms from buying up entire neighborhoods of residential homes. You can do all sorts of things. But the Biden administration, of course, has been very hands-off, in my opinion, when it comes to the housing crisis. And that is now becoming more and more of a political liability. And I'm gonna be honest with you, I'm happy to see that. Because the only way politicians are ever going to listen to our concerns is if they see that ignoring our concerns is tantamount to political suicide. And so I hope this becomes more and more of an issue to the point where politicians have no choice but to finally, in a very robust way, address the real housing crisis that Americans are grappling with as we speak. Now, there's more. So about half of Latino support providing a path to citizenship for immigrants who came to the United States when they were children. That's actually a lower percentage than I would have expected. So even I thought that more Latinos wanted to do something for the Dreamers. But you also have to keep in mind, it is a mistake, in my opinion, to assume that all Latinos here are totally cool with the way the immigration system is working. A lot of them actually came here and went through an incredibly difficult process to become legal citizens. And so you gotta understand that component of it as well. When it comes to Immigration and Border Patrol, that actually ranks 6th in this poll. So that is not the #1 priority. It doesn't even make the top 5 for Latino voters. But the poll also found that most Latinos do not believe that Republicans would do a better job when it comes to the economy either. Asked who would better address the issue of inflation and the rising cost of living, 39% of Latinos surveyed said Democrats and 21% said Republicans. 51% said they would vote or lean toward voting for Biden if he were in a head-to-head race with Trump in the 2024 presidential election, compared to 33% for Trump. In Florida, Trump got a larger share of Latino voters, 45% to Biden's 39%, while Biden did best in Pennsylvania, 58% to 26%, the poll found. So that's the other thing. I mean, if you take a look at the Latino vote as a whole and look at what the popular vote is likely going to be, Biden still does pretty well among Latino voters. But you should also consider the fact that we decide elections based on the Electoral College, and the Latino population is not a monolith. Latino voters in Florida, who mostly consist of Venezuelans, Cubans, they tend to be far more conservative. So that's part of the reason why Democrats don't tend to do well in Florida these days when it comes to the presidential election. And remember, we've talked about other polls that have come out recently that have far worse results for Biden, including that New York Times Siena College poll, which found that the majority of Hispanics thought former President Donald Trump would do a better job on the economy, but that was based on responses from 235 Hispanic registered voters. And a Univision poll of 1,400 Hispanic registered voters conducted in September found that just 27% of the Latino registered voters polled believed Biden had a plan to deal with the cost of living and inflation, while 30% said they'd heard a little about his plan, but weren't sure it would deal with those issues. About a third said they didn't believe Biden had such a plan. Now, I know what the Biden defenders are gonna say. Oh, but he passed this groundbreaking legislation, the Inflation Reduction Act and the Build Back Better, which of course was watered down considerably. But remember, even the so-called good provisions of those bills basically lead to more of this public-private partnership where private companies get grants from the federal government in order to carry out infrastructure projects or carry out certain programs that are supposed to help the needy in the country. But when you do that, the money tends to get misused, and the help for ordinary Americans tends to be watered down. And so we warned about that as the debates over this legislation were ongoing. We warned that rather than having the government carry out these services, ensuring that they're doing this without private corporations' involvement, that's gonna be a political liability in the long run, because the positive results of this legislation might be felt somewhere down the line, especially when it comes to the building or improvement of infrastructure, but might not even reach the Americans that it's supposed to reach, because again, it relies on private companies to carry out these services. And we know that there's money that gets misused. We know that they're slow to act and do what they're supposed to do in terms of following through with what they're promising as a result of these contracts that have been given to them by the federal government. So if you take a look at how Americans are talking about the economy, it's not good enough to simply say, oh, well, there is a record low unemployment rate. Okay, fine, but how are Americans able to pay their bills given the amount of money they are making through the work that they have? Are they making enough to afford housing? Are they making enough to afford, groceries and gas and all of that? If they're working hard and they're still unable to cover their bills, if anything, hearing Biden talk about Bidenomics and how wonderful the economy is, it's gonna anger them rather than persuade them that Biden's doing his job correctly or actually looking out for them in their best interests. All right, we gotta take a quick break. When we come back, we'll fill you in on the ongoing war in Gaza. Cenk Uygur will be joining me, and you guys will love it. We'll be right back.
All right, back on TYT, Cenk and Anna with you guys, also Song of Sparrow and Randy. We appreciate you guys joining. Membership makes this possible. I don't say that lightly, guys. That's just a stone cold fact. If we don't have enough members, we don't exist. So join buttons below, tyt.com/join. I hope you get it. All right, Anna.
All right, well, this is a segment where I'm gonna have some egg on my face because I made the mistake of taking the IDF's word at face value, and you should never do that, I guess. So let's talk about some recent reporting from Haaretz. Haaretz is now reporting that Israel did in fact lie about or embellish some of the atrocities that were committed by Hamas on October 7th. Now, they were clear in noting that there were in fact atrocities committed by Hamas on October 7th, but there were certain things that were unproven and later shown to be complete lies or embellishments. So let's go through them one by one. First, they talk about the atrocities that are verified, and these atrocities make it abundantly clear to me that the IDF and the Israeli government really had no reason to lie or embellish anything that Hamas committed, because these atrocities are bad enough. As Haaretz notes, members of Hamas and Palestinian Islamic Jihad, as well as other Gazans who entered Israel, committed war crimes and crimes against humanity. They viciously murdered about 1,200 people, most of them unarmed civilians. They abducted about 240 people, both civilians and soldiers, including women and children, even a baby. So that's been verified. And those atrocities are bad enough without having to embellish anything, without having to lie about anything. There's more. A variety of evidence is available on Hamas's cruelty, which includes the murder of parents in front of their children and children in front of their parents. There were sexual assaults, rapes, and mutilations, while some victims were bound and some of the dead were desecrated. Some homes were burned with the people still inside. So again, Haaretz is abundantly clear, these atrocities happened. But again, certain things were lied about, certain things were embellished, and they provided specific examples. Ishay Cohen, a journalist for the ultra-Orthodox website Kakar Hashabat, interviewed Lieutenant Colonel Yaron Buskila of the IDF, their Gaza division. Buskila talked about babies who had been hung on clotheslines. His remarks were cited by a host of Twitter personalities around the world. Cohen wrote that he was later informed that the story was inaccurate and deleted the post. Quote, "Why would an army officer invent such a horrifying story? I was wrong," he added. The story was false, but Hamas terrorists did desecrate corpses during the massacre, especially the bodies of soldiers. There were also beheadings and cases of dismemberment. Now, what there isn't any evidence of is babies being beheaded. So it appears that that was also made up by the IDF. And I was incredibly angry with people who denied that that happened, because in my mind, I was under the, even at this point in my life when I shouldn't be naive about anything, where I should be as jaded as humanly possible, where I shouldn't believe anything that comes out of anyone's mouth, and I should find everyone suspect. I just couldn't believe that anyone would even dream up a lie like that. The beheadings of 40 babies. I just couldn't believe that anyone would lie about that. But I guess I was wrong. I have more evidence of what they lied about in just a moment. Cenk, do you want to jump in?
Yeah, I once publicly said that line that now turns out to be propaganda about beheading babies, and I'm sorry about that. And I definitely should have known better. There's classic propaganda that comes out of every kind of war and conflict. The one that's the most common is also one of the ones that Haaretz disproves here, which is stabbing pregnant women in the abdomen and killing their babies in them. It's in every story of every war where you want to paint the other people as monsters, okay? And so when you see that story, I'm telling you right now ahead of time, 9 out of 10 times, it's a total fabrication. And why do they do it? Because it's the thing that revolts us the most. Imagine poor pregnant woman and the guy's, bayoneting or knifing the thing. In reality, what happened? Turns out that it was a woman who was, by the way, these are all terrible, like Anna said in the first place. It doesn't matter, you don't have to make up things. The things that happened were already horrific enough. A pregnant woman was shot and she lost the baby in the hospital. So there's 2 babies that died apparently. Now 2 babies is already infinitely too many. But okay, just there's a story about decomposing babies we're gonna get to in a second in a hospital in Gaza. There's 3 babies that died in that one. There was 8 that died in Al Shifa Hospital. So that's 11 babies right there.
So now, what would Dana Bash do? She would come out and say, how dare you not condemn the 2 babies? What are you bothering to quote an Israeli newspaper for, giving you the reality of what happened and didn't happen? Well, how about the 11 Palestinian babies? No, that means you don't care about the Israeli babies. No. I'm sorry, but if you're all going around saying we should just be one-sided, you should only care about Israeli civilians, you should never care about the Palestinians, sorry, I don't agree, and you're monsters. So those 2 babies that died in Israel, it's horrific and unbelievably wrong, but don't bother lying about decapitated babies. And for IDF, you're nuts if you trust a word that the IDF says. Nothing but lies 24/7. And if you believe them, you're just being so biased. It's ridiculous.
You know, there was evidence of atrocities committed by Hamas, after October 7th. You see those videos all over social media. And again, I just find it so hard to believe that they would feel the need to embellish or add additional lies to the atrocities that Hamas actually did commit. And
yeah, I don't find it hard to believe at all. Netanyahu is a serial liar. He lies about almost everything.
I get it.
He instructs, and his right-wing government is filled wall to wall, rim to rim with liars. And all they ever do is lie about Palestinians. So, and by the way, it's not just about Israel, guys. In every conflict, no matter what their ethnicity is, people always lie about atrocities. And so, but then when you tell the truth about Palestinian atrocities, they're like, shh, who cares? They're just Palestinians. Back up all the focus on Israel. All the focus on Israel. Don't you dare mention Palestinian babies.
Hold on, but let me finish my thought, Cenk. Because the other thing I was gonna say is, even when you are skeptical of the way corporate media handles, especially this type of story, right? Unfortunately, the way they report things ends up unwitting to you, like seeping into your own mind. And so think about how they're immediately willing to question the veracity of the death toll in Gaza because they say, oh, it's controlled by Hamas, it's controlled by Hamas, it's controlled by Hamas. The Palestinian Health Ministry controlled by Hamas, you can't believe the death toll numbers, even though historically speaking, they've always been accurate, even though there are other humanitarian organizations who have their own death toll count, and they make it clear. In fact, there's a European group who has the current death toll at 21,000, and the Gaza Health Ministry has it at like 15,000 at the moment, meaning that they're actually more conservative with the death toll numbers that they put out. But at the same time, when it comes to anything the IDF has to say, well, corporate media takes it at face value, they report it at face value, and they never question it. And so I think what ends up happening is that kind of culture, that way of covering the story, slowly but surely starts seeping into everyone's minds, where you think that the IDF is more credible than anything, and it's just not. This story makes it abundantly clear to me. I want to give you some other examples. According to sources, including Israel's National Insurance Institute, kibbutz leaders, and the police on October 7th, one baby was murdered, 10-month-old Mila Cohen. She was killed with her father, Ohad, on kibbutz Be'eri. So the notion that 40 babies were decapitated, it's just unfounded, hasn't been proven. And in fact, more and more outlets, including Haaretz, do not believe that actually happened. According to the National Insurance Institute, 5 other children ages 6 or under were murdered. 14 children ages 12 to 15 were killed in Israel in rocket strikes launched from Gaza, but not at massacre sites in southern Israeli communities. And also there's no evidence that children from several families were murdered together, rendering inaccurate Netanyahu's remark to US President Joe Biden that Hamas terrorists took dozens of children, tied them up, burned them, and executed them. So that was a lie. What Netanyahu said there was an absolute lie. Finally, I wanna go to some other examples. So no children ages 6 or 7. Okay, so there was another issue. So apparently there was an allegation that by a Zaka member. So Zaka is an ultra-Orthodox organization or group. They reportedly spoke about the body of that pregnant woman found at Kibbutz Be'eri, whose abdomen had been cut open. So Cenk already shared with you how that was a lie. Well, that same person, that same Zaka member, repeated his account to Haaretz, adding that he actually saw this woman at house 426 on the kibbutz. He said this, "It was full of blood," he said. "When we turned her over, we saw that the abdomen was open, a knife was next to her, and we saw the fetus attached to the umbilical cord, and she had been shot from behind." He said that he found the woman next to the house's entrance and that a 6 or 7-year-old boy was found shot in the safe room. But here's the other part of the lie, aside from the pregnant woman. But no children, 6 or 7, or near those ages were killed. House 426 is in the Ashlem neighborhood, which largely houses kibbutz veterans, older people. So the notion that there was a 6 or 7-year-old child found there who was also shot was a lie. And here's another story that was spread just a few weeks ago. United Hatzalah president Eli Beer told of a baby that was placed in an oven and burned to death, but this story also is not true. 10-month-old Mila Cohen was murdered in the massacre along with the baby still in the womb of her mother, who died after her mother was shot on her way to the hospital. So again, it's like, no, there are atrocities that happen that are bad enough, that would have made everyone on Israel's side after what Hamas did, that would want Israel to root out Hamas following these atrocities. But they had to go the extra mile and lie about all sorts of things, which I just don't understand.
I know why they do it. So in another line that Haaretz broke down, they said that they hung babies on clotheslines. So why do you say such outrageous things and burning babies in ovens and decapitating babies? Because you want to build in the minds of your own citizens and citizens throughout the world that the other side is Nazis. And so what you're about to do to them, which is murder their civilians at extraordinary rates, is totally okay because they were Nazis who had it coming. So they're monsters, they're not human. So when we murder them, don't worry, we're not murdering actual human beings. We're murdering the Nazis who were burning children alive. Okay, yep. That's why they do it. That's why because the IDF was planning to murder as many Palestinian civilians as possible. If you catch feelings over that, I'm sorry, but they've done it in every conflict. In every conflict, they kill about at least 10 times as many Palestinian civilians as Israelis that were killed, whether they were civilians or soldiers. And then they go, oh, did we miss again? Oh, we missed again and again and again. Golly gee, we have the worst aim in the world. All we do is massacre civilians after civilians after civilians. And then Hamas is perfectly safe in the tunnels. And we showed you the video of the tunnels totally unaffected. But golly gee, I guess we couldn't hit the tunnels after we dropped thousands of 2,000-pound bombs in the middle of refugee camps, buildings, etc. Look, if you believe the IDF, you're a sucker. They never tell the truth. All of this is total propaganda. And again, for the 88th time in a row, or the 112th time in a row, the atrocities were bad enough. You didn't have to lie about them, but you just can't help yourself because all of those right-wing cabinet ministers knew they were gonna go and kill an extraordinary amount of Palestinian babies and women and children and men and civilians. So that's why they put out those statements. So you think, oh, it's justified to kill all of them. And I want to give credit to Haaretz here, an Israeli newspaper that did a terrific job of outlining the actual atrocities and how terrible they were and the lies. And that's journalism, and thank you for having that.
When we come back, we'll talk about how if you're on CNN, you're not allowed to condemn what's currently transpiring in Gaza. You instead need to be hyper-focused on what happened on October 7th and pretend as though that all happened in a vacuum. We'll be right back.
All right, back on TYT, Cenk, Anna, and Brian, Bruce, and Disco Stu. Thank you for gifting 5 Young Turks memberships. We appreciate you, Anna.
All right, well, we've got more updates on Israel. Let's get to it.
Hamas needs to be taken out. It is a terrorist organization.
How would you do that?
But I think the way to do that, as many terrorism experts have said, is to create a durable and strong coalition of allies within the Middle East, with the United States, with Israel, to make sure that we have a long-term political solution, that there is an alternative to Hamas to lead in Gaza and to establish a state for Palestinians. This is, I mean, we have to condemn what Hamas did on October 7th. We cannot allow for 15,000 Palestinians to date to have been killed.
Even as Israel's aerial bombardments of the Gaza Strip lead to more women and children losing life and limbs, the incessant deflections to what occurred on October 7th also continue, as if what's transpiring today as we speak isn't something that we should pay any attention to whatsoever. Now, as you heard from progressive Congresswoman Pramila Jayapal, she very clearly condemned Hamas. She very clearly referred to it as a terrorist organization, but it wasn't good enough for Dana Bash. In fact, she got real snippy when Pramila Jayapal had the audacity to call out the insanely high civilian death toll, which mostly consists of women and children in Palestine. So with that said, let's watch more of how that conversation went down.
I've seen a lot of progressive women, generally speaking, they're quick to defend women's rights and speak out against using rape as a weapon of war, but downright silent on what we saw on October 7th.
And I've condemned what Hamas has done. I've condemned
specifically
all of the actions. Absolutely, the rape, of course. But I think we have to remember that Israel is a democracy. That is why they are a strong ally of ours. And if they do not comply with international humanitarian law, they are bringing themselves to a place that makes it much more difficult strategically for them to be able to build the kinds of allies to keep public opinion with them. And frankly, morally, I think we cannot say that one war crime deserves another.
So if you have two brain cells to rub together, what Pramila Jayapal said there was pretty clear. Right? We have higher standards for a so-called democracy and an ally of the United States. And slaughtering a high percentage of innocent civilians is going to lead to more extremism, and it's going to keep Israel less safe. She's very clear. She's condemning Hamas. She's condemning the sexual violence committed against women, Israeli women. But she's also saying, hey, but Israel needs to think a little more strategically about how they're carrying out these military operations. Dana Bash, not happy about that. Let's watch.
With respect, I was just asking about the women, and you turned it back to Israel. I'm asking you about Hamas. In fact,
I already answered your question, Dana. I said it's horrific, and I think that rape is horrific, sexual assault is horrific. I think that it happens in war situations. Terrorist organizations like Hamas obviously are using these as tools. However, I think we have to be balanced about bringing in the outrages against Palestinians. 15,000 Palestinians have been killed in Israeli airstrikes, 3/4 of whom are women and children.
And it's horrible, but you don't see Israeli soldiers raping.
Well, Dana, I think we're not. I don't want this to be the hierarchy of oppressions. I think 15,000 people have been killed.
So rapes are abhorrent and absolutely should be condemned, which Pramila Jayapal did several times in the context of that interview. But you know what's also terrible? Slaughtering women and children on the other side. But you're not allowed to bring that up because it's considered equivocating. I don't think it's even equivocating, especially when you consider the numbers on the Palestinian side. We're just supposed to pretend like that doesn't exist? And by the way, like what more do you want her to do? Do you want her to burn herself alive in protest of what Hamas did? She condemned Hamas. How many more times do you want her to condemn Hamas before we can actually have a substantive discussion about what's happening right now, what's happening right now? Go ahead, Cenk.
So I think this is a new trick. So this is a way of preventing any criticism of Israel, because you ask someone, do you condemn Hamas? You go, yeah, of course I condemn Hamas. But we came on to talk about what Israel's doing in Gaza, so let me also criticize Israel. Oh, I can't believe you would do equivocation and say that it's a false balance. How dare you criticize Israel when we were talking about Hamas? Are you trying to cover up for Hamas? Well, okay, so this is a trick. So Dana Bash, admit that you're doing, and by the way, she started with a total lie. She started with, now, a lot of progressive women aren't criticizing rape. What, where, what, how? What are you talking about?
No, you should.
Where did you come up with that? What a preposterous lie.
Take her at face value, Cenk. She says it, so it must be true.
Oh yeah, what a journalist. Show me, and if, okay, so if this is the trick, they're like, well, Pramila Jayapal and other progressive women have condemned Hamas in all of these different ways. But they didn't mention such and such rape, so that doesn't count. So they didn't mention the rapes. Okay, Dana Bash. 8 premature babies dead in El Shifa Hospital, 3 dead in Al Nasser. Did you tweet about it, mention it publicly at all? If you didn't mention that Israel murdering those 11 babies, I guess you don't care about babies. I mean, you didn't say it publicly. You didn't say it publicly.
Dana
so
Bash.
You're in favor of the terrorists, Dana Bash. I mean, this is your dumbass logic.
No, but honestly, at this point, Dana Bash, do you condemn what Israel is doing in slaughtering babies?
That's a real
Dana
question.
Bash, hey, Dana Bash, I haven't heard you. I haven't heard anyone on corporate media, any of these corporate media hosts condemn the barbarism and brutality of the IDF. Dana Bash, are you okay with premature babies being taken off of the machines keeping them alive, or the babies who are left to suffer and die on their own as hospitals are forced to be evacuated? Is that okay? Or do you condemn it? I mean, it's just so gross. And then you have the Democrats lining up one by one to condemn Pramila Jayapal as if she didn't very clearly, multiple times in that interview, condemn Hamas. Let's start with Debbie Dingell.
How would you have had your colleague answer Dana's question?
I'm going to talk to Pramila. I have a call into her. I think I'm going to just speak for myself on this subject, and I'm raw on this subject because of the hate that I have had directed at me for speaking the truth. I will speak the truth, and I don't care who it is. Rape is an act of violence, and it becomes too often a tool in any act of war. And as women everywhere, we must stand up for women everywhere.
Oh, that's fascinating. I mean, she's so disgusted with what happened with Hamas, and she should be. Obviously, this is an opportunity for her to condemn Pramila Jayapal while pretending to play nice. But let's just get a good hard look at who Debbie Dingell is, right? Because she's not on the record condemning the slaughter of innocent children in Gaza, the slaughter of innocent premature babies in Gaza. She has no problem with that. She hasn't said anything about it publicly, at least. But she has been on the record in regard to human rights for Palestinian children. Let's go back to 2019. This is a headline from the Detroit Free Press. Dingell withdraws support for bill promoting human rights for Palestinian children.
Vote her out.
Okay, so I looked into the piece because headline can be misleading, right? I wanted to read and see maybe there's a good reason why she was against humanitarian rights or human rights for Palestinian children. So the bill talked about how 500 to 700 Palestinian kids between the ages of 12 to 17 are basically detained by Israel every year, and they're prosecuted before a military court system that lacks basic and fundamental guarantees of due process in violation of international standards. So this legislation was meant to respond to that and expect better from Israel in regard to the prosecution of children. And Dingell wasn't in favor of it. She says, we must be committed to promoting a peaceful two-state solution that empowers the Palestinian people to live in dignity and security with Israel. After talking with many in my community about this bill, meaning the lobbyists, the pro-Israel lobbyists, come on, I felt HR 2407 was ultimately counterproductive to a peaceful two-state solution to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. How exactly is the fair prosecution of children who have been detained by Israel somehow an obstacle to a two-state solution? Come on, Debbie.
Can you imagine if they said it in reverse? Well, look, I don't want to condemn Hamas for taking his children as hostages without any due process, because it would be counterproductive to a two-state solution. That would be a lunatic thing to say, right? But they say it about Israel. Oh yeah, they kidnapped a whole bunch of people. I detained them indefinitely with no charges. And they won't even bring him to a military court, which convicts him at a 99% rate. They have such little evidence, they won't bring it to a kangaroo court. But no, it's not kidnapping when a government does it. When a government does it, it's beautiful and should be respected. And they have a right to defend themselves by taking non-stop hostages from the other side. Okay, so, but the thing that bothers me the most is they're all pretending, and now no one knows. Like, if you ask anybody that just barely is paying attention to this kind of conflict, but they heard about Pramila Jayapal, they'll all think that she didn't condemn Hamas or didn't condemn the rapes.
Exactly.
Because everyone in media and every politician is pretending she didn't condemn them. When we showed it to you, you just saw it with your own eyes and you heard it with your own ears. Several times she condemned Hamas and said they have to be rooted out completely. And she said the rape, it was terrible and horrific. I mean, what else do you want her to say? Say what you want her to say and be honest about it. Here's what they actually want her to say. Oh, those Palestinians, they're such monsters and savages. It's all their fault. Oh, Israel, no, I can't criticize Israel because you already asked me to comment about Hamas. Because it can't happen in the same interview. Otherwise, we'll say false equivocation. This is our new trick for protecting our beloved Israel, okay? And look at what Dana Bash said there. She's like, well, Israeli soldiers don't rape Hamas and Palestinian women. Wait, hold on. Well, before we even get to any rape or anything like that, 15,000 dead civilians in Gaza, a huge percentage of them women. So Israeli soldiers do drop bombs that crush the skulls of Palestinian women, that burn Palestinian women alive. That's what happens when you drop a bomb on someone. Are you gonna pretend that's not what happens?
Yes, they are, and that's what they're doing as we speak. And by the way, the atrocities committed by Hamas were awful and should be condemned.
Obviously.
But what is currently happening in Gaza is currently happening in Gaza as we speak, with our money, with our bombs. And so the point of having these discussions in regard to what Israel is doing is to apply pressure so Israel stops doing it. But you're not allowed to have that conversation. You're not allowed to have that conversation. Sorry, Jake, go ahead.
Yeah, so Dana Bash, have you condemned what Israeli soldiers are doing? What the IDF is doing, what Israel is doing? Have you condemned burning all those people alive when they drop bombs on them? Oh, you haven't. What kind of monster does that make you? And that one's real. Before, when I was doing the hyperbole, I'm saying, how would it feel if you said this? But in this case, all you're doing is running cover for Israel in this case. Oh, don't criticize Israel. How dare you? They're allowed to burn as many women as they like. Oh, they're civilians. Who cares? They're Palestinians. Why don't you just be honest for the first time in your life and just say it? Just say it. You don't care about Palestinian women. Okay, so Israeli women dying, we all agree, we say it, Pramila Jayapal says it, every progressive says it. It's horrible, horrific, Hamas shouldn't have done it. But when it comes to Israel killing women, all of a sudden we're divided. We say it's terrible, and Dana Bash and all those politicians come out and go, not horrible. Not horrible.
Okay, so let's be fair. Unlike Dana Bash, let's be fair. Dana Bash doesn't say it isn't horrible. It's just that she wants to immediately pivot away from a discussion about how horrible that is. And by the way, you want to talk about rape? Okay, we could talk about rape. There was actually a different CNN program featuring the State Department official who actually quit, veteran of the State Department, Josh Paul, who quit over the US arms transfers to the IDF, to Israel. So Josh Paul actually talked about the topic of rape while speaking to Christiane Amanpour. Take a look at the video.
I was part of the human rights vetting process for arms going to Israel, and a charity called Defense of Children International Palestine drew our attention at the State Department to the sexual assault, actually the rape of a 13-year-old boy that occurred in an Israeli prison in the Moscovia in Jerusalem. We examined these allegations. We believe they were credible. We put them to the government of Israel. And you know what happened the next day? The IDF went into the DCIP offices and removed all their computers and declared them a terrorist entity. I think it is vital that atrocities not happen to anyone, not sexual atrocities, not sexual violations, not any kind of gross violation of human rights. We are looking at a situation where there is so much dehumanification, where people are not seen for the value that they have. And I think that's true whether you're talking about those who are attacked on their kibbutz or those who are attacked in their homes in Gaza.
So can we have a conversation about that, Dana? Is that okay?
How come she didn't tweet about it? Dana Bash has never said anything about that 13-year-old boy being raped by Israeli soldiers. or whoever did it in the prison. Let's be fair. How come you haven't condemned it? That's it. According, not to my standards. My standards thinks this is insane. But according to Dana Bash's standards, she's pro 13-year-old rape. Because she didn't condemn it. She didn't condemn it. And don't you dare ever mention Palestinian atrocities, because you can't condemn that and mention Palestinian atrocities at the same time. That's your new standard. That's your new standard. We're only allowed to talk about that one issue. You like your new standard? This is absurd. Why don't you, look, this is just a protection racket for the Israeli government and its atrocities. Yep. And every time you say that it's a false equivocation when Israel has killed more than 10 times as many civilians, what you're saying is those civilian lives don't actually matter, because I don't think Palestinians are human beings. And that's actually real. To say, how dare you equivocate Hamas and Israel when Israel has only killed 10 times as many people as Hamas. Okay, then you're admitting you just don't care about Palestinian lives.
They're literally bombing ambulances, okay? Dozens of doctors have died in Gaza. Dozens of journalists have died in Gaza. The number's quickly approaching 100. I mean, and it's continuing. That is the reason why people want to have that conversation. That kind of carnage is continuing. You can't go back in time and stop Hamas from doing the disgusting atrocities it had committed on October 7th. But the hope in having the conversations about what Israel is currently doing is, again, that it could potentially apply enough pressure to prevent the slaughter of innocent people.
And Hamas is not our ally. Israel is our ally.
Exactly.
We give money to Israel. We don't give money to Hamas. We just gave $14 billion more to Israel to bomb more Palestinian women and burn them alive, babies, and burn them alive when they drop bombs on their buildings. What are you gonna do? You're gonna pretend that's not what happens when you drop a 2,000-pound bomb on a refugee camp or a residential building? Go ahead, do more propaganda. Pretend you're a journalist until the whole time say, don't anybody ever criticize Israel, okay? And then watch, they'll come back around and say, even though we said it how many times did we say it? You can go count how many times we said Hamas was wrong and committed atrocities. I bet you they watch this video and then they come out and lie all over media and go, oh no, they didn't condemn Hamas enough.
Right, no, to 100%. And guess what, we don't care.
We don't care,
yeah,
we do the truth here.
Exactly.
We do the truth about all sides here. We don't do propaganda for a living.
All right, we're gonna take a break. When we come back, Lindsey Graham weighs in on this whole debate. So we've got that and more coming up, don't miss it.
Thanks for listening to the full episode of The Young Turks. Support our work, listen ad-free, access members-only bonus content, and more by subscribing to Apple Podcasts at apple.co/TYT. I'm your host, Cenk Uygur, and I'll see you soon.